Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
I recently launched a series on Workology focused on women in the workplace. The feedback from my first blog post was clear. I received many emails, direct messages, and phone calls of women sharing their stories and wanting more. So today we're tackling the topic of imposter syndrome. A recent study found a third of millennials experience self-doubt at work, and 40% of women say they felt intimidated by senior people, compared to 22% of men asked. How do we navigate our personal sea of self-doubt? I'm hoping to dive into that topic on today's episode and that it will get you moving and thinking in the right direction. Today I'm joined by Sherry Geis. She's the founder and life coach at Big Bravely. Sherry, welcome to the Workology Podcast. Today I'm joined with Sherry Geis. She is the founder and president of Big Bravely. Sherry, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you talk a little bit about your background and what you do?
I have been a life coach for about 3 years. I've been a personal growth junkie for a whole lot longer than that. And I help people figure out who they really are without all the roles and without all the labels, and just become a more authentic version of who they are as a human being so they can go live the life they actually want to be living.
How does one become a life coach?
One becomes a life coach. I think one becomes a life coach from getting a calling. It's the most gratifying work I've ever done. It's not the easiest job to have. For me, it's not the hard part's not the one-on-one client work, which is like my soul's bread and butter. It's why I do what I do. It's hard to, for me, it's been hard to talk about it, hard to market it. Navigating the online entrepreneurship world has been challenging. But how I became it, I've always been a person that people come to with help or concern, or they just need empathy. And 3 or 4 years ago, I was feeling less in love with my profession of public relations. I like the storytelling aspect of PR, but I knew there was something bigger or other for me, and I got training and learned how to hold space for people and do the work of untangling all this social conditioning that we carry around with us.
The subject of today's podcast is something we've been diving into as part of a new series on Workology that focuses on women in the workplace. And last week I had our first blog post where we just talked about women in the workplace, how to deal with female bullies, challenges that women face. And today is a continuation of the series. I thought it appropriate to focus a little bit about imposter syndrome, because it's something that I've struggled with quite a bit, and I know in hearing from other women that they are struggling with it too. Sherry, can you talk to us a little bit about what imposter syndrome is?
So in my lens, imposter syndrome is kind of the thing that happens when you think the world is about to find out that you have no idea what you're talking about, or that you're a fraud. I'm not sure how you orient on swearing on your podcast, but
you can swear.
Oh, yay!
It's approved. It's approved.
We love swear words. Yeah, it's that feeling of like they're all going to find out that you're full of shit, or that you don't know what you're talking about, or it's self-doubt, it's feeling not good enough. It's just like that foundational way of being. And how one copes with it is you sort of artificially build yourself up. Like you put on a brave face or a thick skin, or you go get a ton of education, or there's all these different ways we try to manage it. And if we don't heal it from the inside, it's just a hustle. It's a hustle for self-worth or to prove yourself. It zaps your energy. It affects your ability to meaningfully connect with people. It keeps you elevated in a stress response. So like your fight, flight, freeze mechanisms may be online more often than they should be. Of course, I'm like going to the worst case scenario of like, if you have insomnia, that might be, one of the root causes of it. But, at the end of the day, I think of imposter syndrome as just that hustle to make sure nobody realizes how much doubt you have in yourself.
So I think a lot of us have doubt and we can't be positive all the time, and we're not alone. There are lots of people who have experienced imposter syndrome, including Maya Angelou, Tom Hanks, Michelle Pfeiffer, Sheryl Sandberg, Sonia Sotomayor, she's our U.S. Supreme Court Justice, and even Emma Watson. So there's a lot of folks that are experiencing this, men versus women, although what I have found in doing research on the topic is that it's more prevalent or more common in women. And there's a 2011 Institute of Leadership and Management study that surveyed managers about how confident they felt in their professions. And half of the female respondents reported self-doubt in their jobs compared to less than a third of men. Why do you, and maybe in your work too, since this is your full-time gig and this is how you make a living, are you seeing that? And then if so, why more women than men?
In my own work, I would say that probably 2/3 of my clientele are women and 1/3 are men. And having self-doubt at some point in their life is a human condition because of the culture that we live in. But women in particular women at work, hearing you say those statistics, the first thing that came to mind is just sexism. Like, they're, up until very recently, I mean, not that women's liberation hasn't shifted the landscape drastically in the last 30 or 40 years, but there's still been like, it's permissible to treat women as lesser than. They get to make less money. They have to juggle more roles. They have to be the caretakers of the office. Like, there's a lot of this stuff that comes with being a woman in a workplace. And that's asking someone to be a lot of people to a lot of things. And we're only human. So if a woman struggles to keep up with all those roles, that absolutely makes perfect sense that they would have self-doubt. And they get messages constantly from the culture, from the media at how they are different and they have to work harder, and it's unavoidable to internalize those messages. What I would love is if women could take a pause when those self-doubt thoughts come up and learn to give themselves a whole lot of empathy. I think that empathy and awareness are two huge tools to point to yourself to really move the needle on self-doubt. Yeah, I've had a lot of clients who want to grow their confidence, and they think that it's a thing that you go and you do. Like, give me the 10 tips for growing my confidence and I will go and do them. And doing is such a common tactic of hustling for your worth. The real way, I think, for people to gain confidence, to quiet self-doubt, is to slow down and be kind to yourself and accurately track what's going on in your environment. Like, what's a real threat and what's a perceived threat? What's a role that I actually have, or what's a role I think I should have based on how someone set up the culture of this place I work?
I feel like slowing down is easier said than done, right? Like,
Totally.
our phones are connected to our bodies at all times. We're getting updates. Managers are checking in. Our spouses or children need additional things. Like, just before the podcast, I got a call from the school nurse telling me I needed to bring a new pair of pants for my 9-year-old. So we can't really escape those things. So how do you suggest that we slow down and maybe take a break?
Well, slowing down is like the reduction of things on the to-do list. Like, there's that kind of slowing down, but there's even the slowing down of like what's happening in your inner world at any given moment. Are you tracking too many things in your head? Write them down. Like, that's such a thing that I really is a habit that I had to break. Because if you're constantly tracking something in your head, you're keeping yourself in anxious behavior. And that anxious spin is wearing you thin. Other ways to slow down. Take 3 beats before doing something. Like, notice the stimulus that you're being given. And if you can put any kind of space in between your stimulus and your response to that stimulus, that will give you a slowdown for just a minute. The beauty of the slowdown also is that, okay, let me say this. When we are like in our anxious behaviors, when we're thinking, and doing and fixing, we are limiting our intellect. We are putting our internal resources around the hustle of anxiety. And when we slow down and give that piece space, we allow our cognitive function to return in a more meaningful way. And then our brains work better, then we're more efficient. So like, it's a little bit of a catch-22, but learning new habits around slowing down and being mindful can really bring a lot more efficiency and equilibrium into your life. I treat the word balance with kid gloves because there's a belief that if you can just achieve it, then you'll have balance. And I think that's a little bit of a myth, but you can bring a little more equilibrium into your life so that you're not the work mule for your work family and your home family and your friend group and.
Let's take a bit of a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast, talking with Sherry Geis. You can connect with Sherry on Twitter at MyJourney. That's at MYJRNY. We're talking about how to thrive as women in the workplace and managing imposter syndrome. So, one of the things when I posted this original article, which I'll link to in the copy of the transcript here, and it's about women supporting women, right? I feel like we have so much going on in our lives, and if you're a woman in the workplace and you, whether or not you have aspirations to grow in a position or with a company, or you're just a new mom and just trying to survive, I wondered how we can find a way to handle all these different things. We've got this imposter syndrome, we've got maybe an angry boss, we've got kids to deal with, and politics at the office. What other ways can we go about maybe helping with that anxiety and that stress outside of taking a vacation, which, frankly, I'm a proponent of the 3-day work week if that's the case. But what do you recommend for the clients that you work with?
The clients I work with, I really recommend a deeper level of self-awareness. Whenever you hear if you've got like a difficult coworker or just somebody who's like under chronic stress and is kind of bringing you down, taking a moment to see why that affects you. Does that coworker remind you of somebody in your past, or does that coworker remind you of something within yourself that you've been trying to to move through or to heal or to walk away from? I teach a workshop called Inner Empathy, and part of the function of empathy is understanding what the person in front of you is going through and communicating that you understand that and letting them know that you're feeling for them. And yes, of course, bring empathy to work. But what I'm suggesting is to bring empathy to yourself, to recognize that the stress you're feeling is coming from a place. And where is that stress coming from? Not in a blaming way, but just an awareness of where that stimulus, that stressful stimulus is coming from, so that maybe it can be addressed. What's an interesting thing about anxiety that I really honed in on a couple of years ago is that the part of our brain that's responsible for anxiety is really old. Like, it's the lizard part of our brain. It's not the mammalian part of our brain. It's not the tend and befriend piece. It's just a reactionary, fear-centered part of our brain structure. It's not sophisticated. It doesn't have like feelings around the threat. It just knows the word threat. It is designed to keep you safe. And a lot of people get stuck in anxiety because they have a way of talking to themselves that's less than compassionate. I often call that the inner critic. I didn't coin that term. 1,000 coaches call it the inner critic. But if you can learn to recognize when your inner critic is talking rather than your inner wisdom, and figuring out why the inner critic is feeling unsafe, and if maybe you can give it a little bit of kindness or a little bit of empathy, you will begin to experience more calm. And when you experience more calm, then you experience more intelligence, like your intellect comes online. I can't say it enough. And then I want you to have your intellect. I think we're all really, really smart, and that we can all figure stuff out when we're not stuck in anxiety.
I'm going to link to a video in this podcast transcript also. And I don't know if you're familiar, Sherry, with the Truth Bomb Mom. Have you ever heard any of her stuff?
I have not.
Oh, so she's this mom and she just drops truth bombs, but she talks about a topic and she might be hiding in the closet or in the bathroom, like talking about like the reality of being a mom and juggling it all and dealing with as women, anxiety, just challenges. It might be the pile of laundry that's always in your living room that's staring at you. But
you have to have told me about her before, because as soon as you said hiding in a closet, I'm like, yeah, you've told me about this.
She's great. And so she has this one, and it sort of triggered something. I thought of it immediately because you're talking about that negative self-talk. And so at the episode, she is in her living room and she brings in like her neighbors and friends and sits them down, and then she pulls out a picture of them when they were a little girl, like 5 years. And she says, tell me some of the things that you tell yourself, that you say to yourself in your head, that are mean, that are hurtful, that are tearing you down. And so they talk about it a little. And then she says, now, I want you to look at this picture and I want you to say those same things to this person that was you, and that you can't. Right? And
it's impossible.
Yeah, and the whole point is, like you're saying, like we need to give ourselves a little bit of, credit and lay off a little bit, because we are our worst critic. And honestly, we are more negative towards ourselves than maybe our worst enemies.
Totally. And, for me, it's not about always being positive. Like, it's natural to have negativity. It's natural to be scared. Like, it's built into our biology to have fear. It's important. It's how we didn't get eaten by bears, But it's okay to slow down and say, hey, you're really tired. Your daughter didn't sleep last night, and you're worried about bills right now. And like, this thing happened with the basement and it cost $1,000. Like, yeah, your tank is empty. No wonder things are feeling extra hard right now. Like, what do you need? And of course, the answer is almost always money. And so, those kind of life situations. Like, if I could just get $5,000, it would fix this. But there might be something else you need, like a nap, or to go hide in a closet, or a literal 3-minute walk around the block. Any little thing could make a tiny bit of more space in your brain, in your heart, in your body. I wish I could have every woman do 20% less and take that 20% and just have peace.
It's crazy that you're saying we need to do 20% less when women work harder in the workplace, often because they're a woman, right? And they're overcoming harassment and gender discrimination. They're not being paid enough as much as men. And you're saying, hey, be a little bit easy on yourself. We know it's tough, and take a break because you deserve it.
Right. Like, ideally, I want women to have the lives that don't require heavy duty self-care. Like the life you don't have to constantly recover from. That looks like having a deeper sense of self and really awesome boundaries and good social connections with each other, and people who help you feel safe and loved and seen. And that, sometimes people just like fall off the tree that way. I didn't. I had to do a ton of self-discovery work with coaches and therapists and energy healers and workshops and retreats. And like, I really dug into my own personal growth work about 10 years ago. And I don't know that I'll ever be done, but I have made a huge difference in my ability to function as a caring, loving parent and friend and partner by just doing that work.
And that's really one of the things I really admire about you. And one of the many reasons I love talking to you is that you're always working on yourself and you're doing something new. And even though you're a life coach, right, you're coaching others, but you're still committed to yourself and self-improvement, self-growth, self-awareness.
Absolutely. I can't imagine asking a client to go somewhere that I haven't gone myself. Like it's not like fair to throw them in the arena and say, go dance when I've not done it myself. And you have this unique perspective as one of my friends, is you saw me on the other end of that decade. Like you met me at probably around the beginning of my personal growth journey. So you've seen a big shift in how I orient in the world and the people I choose to spend my time with and all that stuff.
Well, let's talk a little bit about when somebody is working with a life coach and maybe hopefully they're working with you, but how do you work with clients and what does that look like?
So I work with clients in several different ways. Sometimes I teach workshops or am a guest speaker at an organization or at a meeting, but mostly I work either with one-on-one clients or as a facilitator for a group coaching program for women. I have one for men coming as soon as I can figure out an honorable amount of time and space to build it. And both programs are 6 months in duration. When I work with a client one-on-one, I take a good chunk of time to meet them over the phone and hear what they're struggling with, where they want to be, what the gap is in between those things, and see if I'm a good fit for what it is that they want, and knowing what my wheelhouse is and what my favorite things to do for people are. And if it feels like a fit, they have the time, the money, and the energy to go forward. We go and talk twice a month, usually over video chat, so it can be recorded and they can revisit it later. And we just start to intuitive. I say that I coach from an intuitive place. I have certifications and I do a ton of education, but I really try to meet them right where they are. Sometimes that's somebody who's done 5 years of work. Sometimes that's someone who's never even been to a therapist. And we just start to work through how to get back to who they really are. I think we're kind of born as a true self of a person, and then are the product of our parenting, like having been parented by people who may or may not have done a good job or knew what they were doing, and through layers of social, cultural conditioning, hurts that happen, trauma that happens, like all those things layer up, and we develop resources to move through the world to cope with all that. And we get pretty far. And then somewhere in our 30s to 40s or 50s, all those resources that we used to cope with all those layers stop working. And we can't figure out why life doesn't work. Like on paper, I've got everything exactly how it should be, but I'm miserable or I'm exhausted and I need help. And when people find me, we start to look at the more root causes of some of that stuff. I can totally work at the top level layer, but I'm looking for a deeper layer, because once you can get to that stuff, the other stuff begins to resolve itself. It's pretty magical. How it looks when people work with me is it's like you're having a really great conversation with somebody who knows you really well, who is listening on a lot of different levels. They're listening to the story you're saying. They're listening to the story, or I'm listening to the story that they're saying. I'm listening to the story they're telling themselves. I'm remembering what they've said about their family dynamic structure growing up. I'm listening about the family dynamic structure they're living in at that moment. Maybe what their partner's dynamics were, because it's all this kind of matrix. I'm listening for what their values are, and if they're living in those values, or if they're out of integrity, how to get them to where they say they want to be, what tools are missing so that those tools can be installed. Those are just behavioral changes and practices, habits that need to be built up or to be softened. Some habits, like we want to soften them a little, and some other habits are kind of little baby seed habits and they need to be built up. We do a ton of reading. I love to assign books. I think it's a little catastrophic how little our country reads. Like, we don't read books as much as we used to. And I'm on a one woman mission to make that change, I think sometimes.
What are you reading right now that you would recommend?
So my coach, I'm working with a coach right now as a trainee because I believe in education. Her name is Kate Swoboda, and she has a book called The Courage Habit that was just released like a week ago. That's on my nightstand. How to Stop Feeling Like Shit by Andrea Owen is on my table. The Mask of Masculinity by Lewis Howes is on my table. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk has been out recently. What am I reading? My Audible. I also listen to a lot of books and listen to a lot of podcasts. A podcast I recommend to just damn near everyone would be Dear Sugar. Another one would be Death, Sex, and Money. Oh, and Invisibilia. It's an NPR podcast. So good. So informative. Gosh, I want to say to anyone listening, in case no one's told you, it's hard to be a human. That you're struggling is really normal. You should struggle. Our culture is broken. It is immersed in fear and suspicion and division. Like, that you're not functioning well in it is a good sign that you have maintained your humanity. But it's okay to go get a hand with it too. It's okay to call a counselor or a therapist or a coach or a really high quality friend and like sit down across the table from them or get on the phone with them and go, this is fucked up. So they can go, yeah, right. Like, yes, you are correct. Things are not okay. Here's how to go forward out of that.
So where can people learn more about you? And maybe it's the Big Bravely Collective, or they want to bring you into the folds as a coach. Where do they go to learn more?
You would go to www.bigbravely.com. That's my website. That's where you'll find links to my calendar or to my highly neglected blog that should be more online soon. That's where you get to my newsletter link to get on my weekly newsletter list. I have a podcast coming later this year, so that's where that will happen too. But bigbravely.com is a nice hub to visit.
Well, thank you so much, Sherry. I have a whole new host of books that I need to be reading. I'm reading right now on Audible, Barking Up the Wrong Tree. I'm about 5 chapters in, so I like Audible.
I get his emails, so I get those like weekly emails.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today on the Workology podcast.
You are so welcome. I am so happy that you asked me to be here.
Giving yourself a little pause and grace can really go a long way. Sherry provides us with a nice reminder that the real way to gain confidence is to slow down and be kind to yourself. And I'm taking her advice this weekend. While my daughter is away at a camp out with Girl Scouts, I'm taking time out and doing some things that I like, which includes diving into that book, The Mask of Masculinity, that Sherry recommended. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill. Until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to all our previous podcast episodes.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill provided by TotalPicture.com.